Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm a virgin, so be nice to me. Be gentle. This is the first time. So I'm going to read an essay that I wrote for a workshop that Desiree led, and where she liked it, so I'm reading it to her. The name is Chorejon. The first time I saw him, he was basking in the sun on the little patch of green outside my mother's apartment. What I noticed first was his disproportionately big ears. They sprouted from his pointy face, making him look like an oversized mouse. His legs were too short for his long, stout body. He had the coloring of a beagle, the body of a corgi, and an unpedigreed tail. His belly was bulgy, his fur looked scruffy, and you could tell he'd never had a real bath in his whole life. He was the ugliest dog I've ever seen. My intention was to keep walking, but something made me stop. I looked back. At the same moment, he lifted his head and looked at me. His eyes were gentle and his gaze profound. There was pain in those glassy eyes, and a swift sensation of recognition ran through my spine. But I dismissed it with the same sense of urgency I rejected everything in those days. Inside the small apartment, my mother was lying on her bed, braving the last stages of colon cancer. We were at her house for the holidays, which meant I got to spend time with Mom while my husband kept our two boys busy coming up with activities they could do on their own. Grandma was no longer the woman they remembered. The loud, exuberant, and jolly person they knew was now a quiet, sleepy being that they had to tiptoe around. The combination of many pills kept her groggy and confused, even though she was cautious about the painkillers. She wanted to be aware and awake as much as possible for her grandchildren. In those periods when she was able to collect some energy, our conversations were upbeat and jolly. We spent the long days watching old movies, Colombian novelas, and talking about books and family stories. When she slept and there were no errands to run, no medicines to fetch, no doctors to call or family to attend to, I would go out to the yard and look at the ugly dog. His obsequious disposition irritated me, but also gave me peace. He had the ability to make me forget about the ongoing drama, and for a few minutes I was able to breathe free. Inside, the air was stale and heavy and smelled like death. Outside, the stinky dog had whiffs of streets and trash, but smelled like hope and survival. I found out that he was a stray that had followed my niece into the property, and she had let him stay in the apartment building in the common yard. She allowed him to eat from the bowl of food she regularly left outside for stray cats in the neighborhood. The cats welcomed the dog, and he made the building his temporary home, finding shelter under some scraps of wood or behind the bushes at the back of the lot. Some neighbors complained and tried to get rid of him, but he kept coming back. He had no owner, and except for my niece and another neighbor who fed him occasionally, nobody really wanted him around. He stayed out of the way and came out from his hiding place the moment he heard the bowl of food being filled. Even my mother, who was never particularly fond of dogs, could not ignore him. Every time she went to the hospital for treatment, the dog would follow her wheelchair to the threshold of the fence where he would await her return. He made her smile, and she called him and the stray cats her little welcoming committee. I began calling him Chorejon, Chore for short, a term of endearment that loosely means darn jug ears. It was more of a nickname than a name, and my mother approved. After Christmas, she began deteriorating, and we decided to take her to the hospital. On our way out of the apartment, we crossed paths with Chorejon. My mom asked me to stop and call him by his new name, to which the pathetic dog responded happily. Wagging his tail and lifting his ears, he ran towards us, but reduced his speed the moment he saw my mother. She whispered little sweet nothings to him, and he stood on his hind legs to kiss her hand. Goodbye, Chore. I'm not going to see you again, but keep an eye on things for me, okay? Her voice was calm and affectionate. I fought to control the denial reflex and kept my protest to myself. I just kept pushing the wheelchair and looking at the quizzical dog while my brothers helped me set up Mom inside the car. She was admitted to the hospital, and while doctors and nurses went about their labs and tests and scans, Mom and I were trying to get some grip on the situation and keep a sense of perspective. Days went by, and we waited. We talked and we laughed, we played cards. We didn't cry, each of us trying to stay strong for the other. Mom has always been a devout believer, and her faith sustained her during this trial. I, on the other hand, had always found science and faith difficult to reconcile, at least the cancer science and my mother's faith. The medical realm seemed to worship a distant cousin of Ares, the god of war, whose enemy was death. Its soldier, the doctors, the battleground, yourself. The divine seemed to be dealing with a capricious god with no enemies, but whose whims could make the difference between sickness and health, and thus life and death. Science demanded your body as tribute, God your soul. Back at my mother's home, my husband began sending me pictures of Chorejón every once in a while. He figures, since he could not be with me at the hospital, at least he could try to cheer me up with photos of the boys and the dog, and we appreciated the gesture. The happy images seemed foreign and distant and contrasted with the heaviness of our outlook, but gave us both reasons to smile. When she slept, I read. I read about everything. I researched words, the ones that the doctors threw at me. I researched treatments, the ones that we did not take. I searched for guidance, the wisdom I was lacking. I searched for comfort, for meaning, for peace. While the doctors kept battling their war, convinced that as long as there was something they could do, they had to do it, it became clear to me that all these little victories were only extensions of her agony, that we were not giving her more life, but more death. It was in my late night seeking sessions that I came across an anthropologist's paper on Buddhism and the process of dying. It was an essay about human existence, how fragile it is, how precious, about impermanence, its ephemerality, about karma and the consequence of our actions, and about samsara, how life is a cycle of life and death, self-generating, iterative. None of this was news to me. There are concepts that were part of any yoga enthusiast lingo, and they had some resonance for me. Until I came across Fowa, the practice of conscious dying. It was described as bringing consciousness to the process of transcending, all of it through meditation. It involved not only sitting and praying, but also actions like work and charity. And one of them was liberating animals on death row. By saving an innocent creature, you could help the dying person clean his or her karma. Buddhists don't fear death. They don't fight it either. Buddhists embrace it as part of the human experience and find a way to help the dying understand and be present, as well as assist their own process of dying. They find death to be an opportunity for spiritual growth for all involved. I was reading all that when my mom woke up suddenly from her drug-induced dream. "How's your dog?" she asked calmly. I jumped from the chair and went to hold her hand. She was completely awake. "What did you say, Mom?" "I've been thinking about Chorejón." Her voice sounded almost normal, full of energy and demand. "What are you going to do with him?" "Do with him?" I said, trying to decode her look and her question. It didn't matter. She began having trouble breathing, So I pressed a button and the nurses rushed in, moving things around, leaving me confused and full of questions. After a few minutes, my mother was stable and breathing normally, but something had changed. We were reaching a dreaded moment of defeat, when doctors uttered their speeches conceding the win to the disease. The discourse morphs from healing to palliating, and the buzzwords are now quality of life and pain management. You know there is nothing else to do. We've lost. Even doctors will not use the word dying. That is for hospice to deal with. That is for confused patients, family members to handle. Aries just knows how to fight. My mother died a few days later. While we had more conversations, she never asked me about the dog again. I figured she already knew the answer. Things have a peculiar time and way to show up in your life, and the difference between happenstance and blessing evanesces while the brain continues in its compulsion for finding meaning. To the believer, the universe is in its unfathomable wisdom, sends clues and lights up paths to show you the way. To the seeker, in trial times, life just hands you a funny-looking dog. Thank you. And here's the dog.